Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we'll be talking about whether or not the Jaguars will need to make some big moves in free agency in order to put themselves in a spot where they can make a Super Bowl bid for the first time in franchise history in 2023. So, this is really going to be a conversation not about what necessarily makes the best team on the field this year, but what do they have to do to be good enough to go all the way? Because if they wanted to put the absolute best team on the field this year, they could just backload every single contract, add void years, just go all out. But the truth is that ends up making the following years, well, a living nightmare when you do that. And so you limit how much you make those moves. So this is more so about how do we make sure this roster is good enough to where there's no flaws that are going to kill them, and they have the star power to be able to really beat anyone in the league. And so, as of now, our notable losses for this team, if no other players were re-signed, and keep in mind, Evan Ingram over here is going to be franchise tagged, if not signed to a long-term deal. That's the most likely thing. The most notable losses right now will be Jawan Taylor. You could throw in Marvin Jones if you want. They already replaced him with Ridley. Dewan Smoot and Arden Key. Those are the most notable losses. There are other players that would play a role. They might play more of a role as, say, a leader, like an Andrew Wingard would do, and I expect him to be back. But as the roster stands now, that's really, that encompasses your big hits. And so, at this point, what the Jaguars have to address on their roster this offseason from where it is now, I would say it's a swing tackle. They need to make sure they have good edge rushers, primarily the guys who play on the line, not the ones who are the outside linebackers like Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker. And then they also need to get a third cornerback who's going to be versatile, because Shaquille Griffin is not going to stick around with this kind of cap hit. That won't happen. He's probably going to be the first release for this team, and there's a chance he's even traded. So we're going to look at this depth chart and just kind of evaluate this. So Calvin Ridley will be on here once he's reinstated, but this is where they stand at the moment. Now, all the players in orange are the guys who are currently free agents. You see with Evan Ingram, he's in black. I believe that means franchise tag. So he'll be sticking around with this team. For Jawan Taylor, you've got Walker Little you can slot in there, so you're not too worried about the starters there as far as just not having a huge gaping hole on the team. It's if you have someone go down. And we saw that happen last year. We've seen it happen with Cam Robinson, I believe, both of the last seasons. So you definitely want to have someone who can play there. That's going to be really important for this team. And as far as the pass rush, Dewan Smoot and Arden Key, which I'm not sure if Arden Key plays too awfully much as an outside linebacker. Perhaps he does. That's where he's listed on here. But Arden Key and Dewan Smoot are going to be pretty important for this team. And I expect them to re-sign one of them. But at this point, that's really all you're going to need. And then you're going to want that third cornerback like we talked about. Now, last season, with the team that they had going into the playoffs, even with injuries, don't get it wrong, that team, as it was good enough to go win the Super Bowl. They could have done it. And if they had beat Kansas City, if they had not gone their own way and made a poor mistake at the end of the game, it's all past, obviously, and, we're over it, but it's still a really unfortunate mistake with the fumble. This team, if they had beat Kansas City, would have been good enough to beat Cincinnati. That could have happened. And I believe that they would have been good enough to go toe-to-toe with the Eagles. I think they could have done that. And we saw them do it in Week 4 of the season. The only thing that really screwed up that game was the weather. I still think the Eagles were the better team at that point in the season. But the point is that Jacksonville could have gone all the way. They had a good enough team to get it done this last season, even with some issues. And so that's something we got to consider. And so with adding new players in free agency, it really comes down to a choice. And it's a choice between whether or not you want to increase your chances now at the risk of having lower... it's not even really a risk. It just generally is lower chances down the road because you're pushing money down to those seasons. Or do you want to try to play it safe, kind of like Kansas City does, where they don't go way over the cap and they have a lot of money available and they can keep their guys around? That's really the big question. And so for Jacksonville, I think when you look at the players on this team already, they have many of the people they need. If they brought back every single guy they had, as far as the important role players, this team would be good enough to go win a Super Bowl. And even if they don't, I do think you have to consider how good the NFL draft is this year for all of those positions of need. There's a lot of really good tackles. You can find them really early in the draft, some very good players. There's even some guard prospects that could be swing tackles. Osiris Torrance is a really good example of that. So you've got a lot of options at that position. The edge rushing group is really good. There is a ton of players, and they will go deep. You will probably be able to get a really good edge rusher, even into the third round, I would say. I think that's possible. And we always see every year, too, players fall. Perhaps someone will fall in the draft. That could definitely happen. And then the position that's really probably the best in this class is the cornerback position. I think it's even possible for this team to address it with a solid starting cornerback in the slot in the fourth round. I think they could go that deep into the draft and then address it. I think it is possible. And with how much value is there at the cornerback position, how many good players there are, it is really likely that for one of those picks on day one or day two, that a cornerback is the highest on Jacksonville's board out of every player. I could definitely imagine that. So I think in the draft alone, you already have that opportunity to address your issues. Now, is the draft for that? No, it's not. The draft is going to be for adding as much value as you can, adding great players. You don't want to put yourself into addressing needs specifically, because then you're going to skip on better players often. And down the road, your roster is just not going to be as talented. And so free agency is really for addressing needs. But even right now, I think when this team enters free agency, I think it's only going to have one obvious pressing need by the time we get there. And it's probably going to be the cornerback position. I think one of these edge rushers is going to return. It will probably be Arden Key. I think they'll find a way to retain him before free agency starts. And I think as far as Dewan Smoot, I think he's going to be a late signing to the team. I think he could be someone that you could see it on a really cheap deal just because of the nature of his Achilles tear. I think that's definitely possible. I think with Jawan Taylor, I get the feeling that the Jaguars are going to find a way to get it done. They found a way with Cam Robinson. Obviously, it was the franchise tag. But I think with Jawan Taylor, they will find a way to get him back on this team. That's what I expect. I think it's definitely possible he is not back. But I think Jawan Taylor will be on this team. I think when you look at all the players they've got, all the important ones that are currently pending, I think most of them will be here. So, looking at it from that perspective, if you want to address your needs in free agency, even if you're addressing them after re-signing most of these players, I don't think I would consider that spending big in free agency. I think they need to ideally, obviously bring back most of your guys and then go into free agency, get yourself a versatile corner, get someone who can play inside or outside, someone who's not going to cost a lot and can just be at least a reliable starter for the team. And the reason why you do that is so you don't have to go draft a cornerback. And you probably will still, but you should try to pick one up in free agency just to play it safe. So I think that will probably be the one thing we will see for sure from this team in free agency. I could also see them going after another edge rusher, especially if one of our guys doesn't come back. Say that Arden Key hits free agency, gets signed early, because if he hits free agency, that's probably what's going to happen. Maybe the team elects to go get someone who's more of a veteran, someone like a Justin Houston at the position. They could make a move like that. But I think that when you look at free agency, I don't think it's going to present you a ton of really great options to spend big on in the first place. And I think it's more so about just at least getting guys you can start if necessary. Like, just make sure that this team does not have to go one direction in the draft. And so, whether or not I think that the Jaguars need to spend big in free agency, the answer to that for me is I just don't think they have to. I don't see how that's going to be smart for this team. I don't see how it's going to have a huge impact. I get that, say you wanted to go after like Javon Hargrave, that would be a really nice addition, but I don't expect him to be a guy who gets 14 or 15 sacks again. Even if he's like 9 or 10, I don't think that's going to be worth what you're paying him. I just don't think that's going to be a smart move for the team. And my opinion's changed on that. I used to actually be pretty big on bringing in Hargrave. That was one of my early opinions. But I think it's more so considering these players situationally with your team and also making sure that you're spending the right amount on them. Because when we get to the next offseason, the way things are now, if Evan Ingram is franchise tagged, then we're either going to have him getting signed long-term next offseason, or more likely, he gets re-signed this offseason and you have a ton of money and cap space tied up for 2024. This $58 million, that number, will probably be in the negatives by the time that we get to next offseason. And so if you're going to spend big on a free agent, someone's going to have to go. You're not going to be able to retain all these players for a second season. And so I think for that reason, what this team needs to focus on is bringing in the guys who have been here, keeping them around, maybe get one free agent that makes sense to fill a need, make sure you don't have to go one direction in the draft, and then go to the draft and you pick the best player available, even if you don't know if that guy starts the first season. You go get the best player. Just don't pick a quarterback, obviously, right? Or a linebacker or a center, Those are positions that might be a little off the table at this point because I think they're locked up for a while. So that's kind of how I feel on this. Maybe that was a bit of rambling, but I think as far as free agency, we were kind of treated last season. If I think for some of us, perhaps when we watched some of those signings, we were concerned about them. Myself, I was one of them. I was wondering why the heck are we giving Christian Kirk $18 million a year, or at the time we all thought $21 million at first, because that was the maximum value and that was what was reported. But hey, worked out really great last offseason. And this is a team that's going to have to transition into developing their own talent. We're not going to watch them be as active in free agency. I think in the future, if we see them go hard in free agency, it's probably going to be on a much more limited landscape. I think it could be after a player they see sticking around for a long time that they feel like is just a perfect fit. Or it's going to be more likely just going after guys who fill your needs. So that's all I've got for today. We've got, as of now, it's Saturday for me. This will be uploaded the next day. About 10 days till free agency. It's going to be exciting. Combine's almost over, so we'll definitely be talking about that a bit. We'll have On the Prowl this next week, so if you want to listen to that, we'll be talking about everything that happened at the Combine, getting ready for free agency, really just recapping the moves the Jaguars have made. And I'm hoping that on the first day of free agency, we can have our first live show on the channel. I think that would be fun, but just a matter of making sure that we'll have people there and have something to talk about. And I mean, at least some other players are going to get signed, whether it's to Jacksonville or not, right? So thank you all for watching. I appreciate you joining this channel, supporting it. All of that means a lot to me. If you have any ideas on what you want to see, please let me know. Definitely open to ideas right now as things kind of calm down. And with that said, hope you have a great rest of your day. Go Jags.